Hi, I'm Lindley Slippets, and I'm presenting today about quantitative psychology. So about me, I'm in the first year in Dr. T. Kennedy's lab, and I work on network analysis and dynamical systems research. So I started grad school way back in 2011, and at the time when I was an undergrad, I had a lot of professors telling me to go to grad school. But I'm a first-gen college graduate, and I didn't really know anything about grad school or the process or anything. And I didn't really have any faculty mentors to help me through the process. So I decided I'd go because I liked school, but I didn't really know that much about it. So I did 8 years of philosophy grad school, then I did my master's in psychology, and then I applied only to quant PhD programs. And the reason I got into quant is because in philosophy, I work in the quantitative side, which is called formal philosophy. And so since I work in formal philosophy, it just seemed like it was a natural choice to choose quantitative psychology. And I chose UVA because there's a lot of people here who work in networks. And since I'm interested in network analysis, I thought it'd be a good place to be. So quantitative psychologists analyze and create the statistics and methods behind psychological research. We study math, statistics, and research methods. The amount of pure math used ranges dramatically from person to person and research question to research question. And you can really study any topic because everyone needs a statistician. The strengths of a quant area at UVA include network analysis, dynamical systems modeling, structural equation modeling, machine learning, neuroimaging, and optimal research design. This is the curriculum with the courses. So the PhD requires the Common Core, which all of the areas require. Then there's 3 required quant classes and 5 electives, which include Bayesian statistics, network analysis, longitudinal methods, and IoT. We also have a quant concentration, which I highly recommend to people who are in the substantive areas. So with that, you take 7710, 7720, which is something that everyone takes. It's the intro to stat sequence. And then on top of that, you only have to take 3 electives, so they're the same as the electives above. So I highly recommend looking at that. So right now I'm working on the pre-dis, and it's a paper publishable quality. So mine assesses the robustness of the Glasso, the distributional misspecification. So what does that mean? So Glasso is a network estimation technique, and basically what I'm looking at is how well Glasso does with non-normal data. And I found that there's problems with identifying true edges when skew is great and kurtosis is negative. So I'm really interested in psychopathology. And so a lot of the networks I look at are psychopathology networks, which is basically like a relationship between symptoms on the network. And so basically what this is saying is when you have non-normal data, it doesn't pick up on the true relationships between the symptoms. So if you wanted to do something like come up with a treatment, you wouldn't have a true representation of the disorder you're trying to treat. So this is my contact information. So like I mentioned, I am a first-generation college graduate. And so if you are also a first-generation college graduate and you just want to reach out to someone and talk about the process and what it's like to be in grad school, things like that, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tara Valderas, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about quantitative psychology. So I am a 5th-year student working with Dr. Karen Schmidt. We're in quant psych, so we focus on developing, evaluating, and testing the statistics that we use in psychological research. So my research interests include both the quant stuff, which is item response models, machine learning and text analysis, as well as construct validity. So making sure that we're measuring the things that we say we want to measure. And then from the psychological side, I'm interested in emotion expression in text, as well as mood disorders. Now, my interest in mood disorders came from my research background. So originally I wanted to be in clinical psychology, but after working in a clinical lab for a couple of years, I realized it really wasn't for me. While I liked the research, I really wasn't interested in becoming a practitioner. So instead, I decided to cultivate some quote unquote useful skills while I searched for a new path. And I took some graduate stats classes because I knew if I was going to go in psychology, I was going to need to be able to do statistics on the research I wanted. And through that, I was exposed to quantitative psychology because I took graduate psychology stats classes here at UVA. So I met the professors, I met some of the students, and I kind of learned what the field was all about. And I realized that quant psych would let me do research about research, and it would let me use some of the new statistical and coding skills that I was developing, which I was really excited about. So I had a bit of an unusual path to getting here though, and that I only applied to quant at UVA. And this wasn't because I was like aggressively confident, I could see the future. But at the time, I was emailing my current advisor, who I had met when I was an undergrad, and I'd expressed interest in the future coming back to UVA. And she told me that she typically only gets like 1 or 2 graduate students. So if I wanted to come and be her student, I had to apply this year, this cycle, in like a month. So I applied knowing that if I didn't get in, there's always next year when I actually had intended to apply to, more than one program. But a big reason that I wanted to come to UVA was because my now husband was living and working in Charlottesville. And it was really important to me to, be near him, or at least attempt to be near him. And this was something that caused me a little bit of stress and anxiety, because prioritizing like my life and happiness felt like the wrong thing to be thinking about when choosing a graduate program. But in all honesty, reflecting, I think it is really important to consider the location of your program and if you could be happy there. Grad school is a bit of a marathon. You'll be there for at least 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. And you may not have the same sort of social support that you had in undergrad, and that like everybody is looking to make friends and join clubs. And so picking a location and picking a program that you can see yourself in is really important, especially if you are looking for a specific kind of community or people group that's in the area. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline and milestones that we have, specifically about the comprehensive exam and the dissertation proposal. Now, comps, as we typically call it, doesn't actually typically involve an exam. It is possible for your comprehensive exam to be a real exam where you take a test on all the papers you've read, essentially. But what most students do here at Quant is we elect instead to submit 2 publishable papers. So these are papers that are journal quality that you hopefully then go on to try to publish, but actually publishing them is not a part of the qualification. And then you submit them to a committee of 3 readers, essentially 3 psychology professors who either like approve or disapprove your papers. And the second part doesn't typically happen, the disapproval, because we have a very supportive environment here, and our advisors typically do not say, go ahead and submit them until they're confident that you will pass. So it's a pretty achievable milestone. Then you move on to doing your dissertation, which includes your proposal, actually doing the dissertation, and then defense. The dissertation proposal is typically around 40 to 50 pages, inclusive of your references and everything like that. You write it, and then you send it to your committee, and then you do a little presentation that says, this is what I'm going to do. And then they quiz you and talk to you about your proposal. And at the end, they either say, go ahead, do it, do your revisions, or absolutely not. And again, that third one doesn't typically happen because your advisor has hopefully prepared you and given you the go ahead because they think you're going to do it. And you do your dissertation, and then typically at the end of your 5th year, or maybe into your 6th year, you do your defense, where you submit the entire proposal. You again do a presentation, and the same process happens where your committee is going to talk to you, quiz you, ask you questions about it, and then you're a doctor of the revisions, or you're not a doctor and you gotta go back to the drawing board and rewrite some stuff. And again, we don't just pass everybody, but we're in an environment where everyone wants you to succeed. And so your advisor typically works with you, and your committee works with you to make sure that third thing doesn't happen. I am currently in the middle of doing my dissertation. I am actually proposing this week. So my dissertation is called A Psychometric Evaluation of Emotion Detection Lexicons. And the whole purpose of my dissertation is to evaluate how we can automatically detect emotion in text, because doing that is really useful, especially if you want to measure something that people are tweeting about, for example. So either their mood or their political opinions or anything what people write about, emotion detection is really valuable. However, most of these methods were created outside of psychology, where the main outcome measure of how good your lexicon or your algorithm is prediction accuracy, which is useful because you want to make sure that you're predicting good things, but prediction accuracy is not construct validity. By that, I mean, just because you showed that your algorithm predicted something accurately does not mean that you're actually measuring what you're intending to measure. And it does not mean if different methods have good accuracy that these different methods are actually measuring the same thing. And so I want to make sure that when we say we're measuring anger, that what we're actually measuring are facets of anger and not other indicators of emotion. And that when we're using different methods, if like you use a lexicon and I use a different one, that our results are actually truly tapping into the same underlying construct. So I am using tools from psychometrics to evaluate these tools from machine learning so that when we use them in psychology, we can be confident that they're giving us the results that are actually useful to our field. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some career pathways. Now, both academia and industry are super popular in quant. I would say probably it's about a 50-50 split, people who go mainly academia and people mainly go industry. So the nice thing about quant is though the academic market is always tricky and is especially so now, there are often more jobs for quant, and there's two big reasons for this. One, everybody needs a statistician. Having a really strong quant department is very useful for universities to bolster their other psychological research that's going on, because the quality of your research is pretty much only as good as the appropriateness and the quality of your statistical methods. Second, quant is a small field, so there's a little less competition for jobs compared to some other areas of psychology. And the bonus is that sometimes salaries can be higher than in other areas of psychology. This can be true too for postdocs in quant. So it's pretty attractive to go in academia. But we also have industry. Quant is very similar to data science. And so some of the similar data sciencey jobs you can think of, quantitative psychologists can also fill that position. The advantage here we have is that we tend to get training in uncommon but very useful subfields, specifically things like item response theory, where we focus on questionnaire and survey analysis. And questionnaire and surveys are used so much in industry, but most data scientists are not specifically trained in the nuances of analyzing them, like a lot of quant scientists are. And people often go to industry because the pay and flexibility can be higher than it is in academia, though the choice between industry and academia really depends on what your career goals are. However, in my opinion, industry and academia in quantitative psychology are kind of two sides of the same coin, because a lot of academics still freelance, and freelancing can build academic skills. Like being in industry can help you build the skills that you use in academia as well, which I have personally found having done some freelancing on the side, that the things I've done in industry are very applicable in using the skills that I did in academia. So right now I am trying to go into industry as a data scientist and consultant. And so just to give you a taste of like some of the things you could do if you went into industry, I have been designing, piloting, and analyzing surveys for companies to measure personality traits of their customers, to measure behaviors of customers, employees, like what makes people happy, being employed at different places, as well as doing market research and solving consulting problems and things like that. I typically apply some standard psychometric models, as well as a lot of machine learning models, so random forests, some like clustering algorithms and things like that. And then you always are going to be doing your t-tests, ANOVAs, and regressions, because sometimes the most complicated model is not the one that is best for the job. So that's pretty much quant in a nutshell. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. I love to answer questions about quant at UVA, the field in general. I also did win an NSF grants for the Graduate Research Fellowship my second year here at UVA. So if you have questions about that process, especially about how it applies to quantitative psychology, because we're a little bit of a black sheep and that my research methods, a lot of people were not familiar with, my readers were not familiar with, I would be happy to answer those questions too. So thank you and good luck with your application.